Hi, everyone. Hello and welcome. My name is Annie Kwan, and I'm representing the Executive Committee of the Urban Design Panel today in introducing our timely panel presentation entitled Portland Airport Design Process Through the Models. The Urban Design Panel, the UDP, is sponsored jointly by the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, and the American Society of Landscape Architects, and is composed of professionals from those three organizations with a shared interest in urban design. We are joined today by Kathy Wedland, Director of Operations and Member Services of AIA Oregon, which has hosted this event for many years and now generously offers this monthly Zoom meeting until further notice. In addition to a monthly email announcement, our panel presentations can be found on the AIA Oregon event calendar, as well as their weekly Thursdays at 3 newsletter. We encourage you to sign up for information about future UDP presentations held every third Tuesday of the month. And simply send an email to Kathy at AIA Oregon, and we can share that in the chat. And you will be included in upcoming invitations. We also encourage you to send any interesting future panel presentation ideas to Kathy as well. These presentations are recorded and can be found in the link provided in the chat box. Today's presentation will be approximately 30 minutes and will be followed by a Q&A session. For the Q&A, please post your questions and comments in the Zoom box, chat box. Also, feel free to raise your hand virtually at the end of the presentation and we can call on you for questions. Our executive committee member, Fiona Lyon, will be managing the Q&A today and will pose the questions following the presentation. Follow-up questions can be sent directly to today's presenter via the email address that we can share. With that, I will turn the meeting over to our presenter, Rena Simon from ZGF, who's here for a very special presentation, giving us a peek under the hood into the design process of the PDX expansion through the model making process. So thank you, Rena, and enjoy.
Hi, well, thank you all for coming. I'm Rena Simon, architect and design principal with ZGF, and I'm going to walk through our design process with really a series of study models here today. So the Portland Airport has been voted #1 for a number of years, and the port really wanted to keep that status. And so how do you take this airport that people really enjoy because it's intimate, it's got great food, and basically recreate the whole airport and add a significant amount of square footage. So we were really tasked with keeping the intimacy of the existing airport and creating an experience that would reflect the region. And so we developed this concept that is really a series of rooms that creates a sensory experience of a walk in the forest. And so we started with just some really quick iterative foam models. And we were using the program to define these rooms and look to our city, Portland, as a city of parks for inspiration of thinking about the scale of these spaces, Director Park, Pioneer Square. These really started to inform the size of those rooms. And then also thinking about the intimacy of some of Portland's great streets and how the trees, the urban furniture, if you will, starts to break down that scale even further. And what's kind of fun, if you look at this model closely, it's actually doubled in size by a mirror. We only built half of the airport and used a mirror to create the full experience there of this kind of parkscape. But as we were working through these models, we discovered that this insertion of these biophilic experiences could also, not just define the edge of the rooms, but also start to synergize in its location with some of the highest points of stress in the airport. So security queuing, or even, when you're trying to put your shoes on, coming out of security, So we started to define these rooms. And something else that came about in this process was identifying this seam. And no one's going to know what we're talking about now when we say the word seam, but if you were to kind of figure out which words were most used on the project, seam was probably one of those. And really what it was is this threshold between the existing foundation and this new expansion foundation. And that was a zone where we could bring up MEP systems, insert some of these larger trees, and really was this strong threshold we wanted to create between the room of the ticket hall and the room of the market hall. But at this point, we're really just thinking, coming from the ground up, creating those rooms, and we haven't really begun to define what that roof experience would be. So as we're starting to look at the roof and study its character, dappled light is really what we start striving to achieve with puncturing the top of that roof surface, um, and using these two-span systems to try to minimize the amount of columns that might have to puncture down through that haystack of stuff that needs to remain operational below. But one of the fundamental challenges with this kind of top side approach is that it's really, they were one directional. And we wanted people to come through the ticket hall, and when you get to the market, then you're going to go right or left. We wanted that experience to be similar. And so we started looking at concentrating light. So not just having this blanket of dappled light fabric, but how could we puncture that roof more and create these moments of light. And you can see here in this model that seam is starting to register. And the other challenge with that kind of dappled light only approach is that you might be creating measurable light in the space, but you're not really creating perceived light. And so using surface to mitigate glare, but then also have this more visceral experience of light became really important. So we started looking at bringing the clear stories down into the structure so that light could be cast on those surfaces. Um, so creating this dappled experience in addition to these kind of punctures of light, and even potentially integrating an additional element, so some kind of fabric. We did a lot of iterations, just thinking about these light scoops. But in the end, it you know, you're adding these additional layers, it's additional cost. And so we started thinking about, is there a way that the structure could do everything all at once? It could, create these moments. It could also form the skin. So it could turn down and form the skin. And so I want to take us on a little bit of a tangent here, where something I really enjoy doing is kind of setting up a framework for study and then just seeing what comes out of it. So this was just simply taking athletic tape and wrapping it around some basswood sticks and starting to twist and play, kind of twisting the glue lamp essentially, to play with light, in how the structure could do all these things at once. And so this is just a sander in my backyard, really just playing around here. And if it looks like cardboard and popsicle sticks, it's kind of like, because that's what it was. But one of the beautiful discoveries in this was having this kind of structural rigor that could relate to the flow of the space below. And then with the axis of the airport being a 60 degrees rotated, that top surface could twist and start to reference that east-west axis. Um, and it was this, really wonderful potential. And so we took it to the farthest extent we could to see if we could get it to work structurally. And in the end, we just couldn't get those laminations to function the way that they needed to. But this is one of those fun moments in design where um, an idea that doesn't go anywhere on a project resurfaces and you're able to kind of reinvent it on another project. So this is a Barcelona project competition that we did a couple years ago. And so this model with this kind of straight edges that work with the building module, and of course it evolved to what you see here. But it's just a fun moment of where we had this kind of library of ideas to last a lifetime with this airport structure. So this is the first example of being able to use one of those in a new way. So another way that we use the models was at a critical point when we decided that two-way systems weren't really going to work, in the sense that we were already kind of pushed, no pun intended, into a one-way system, having to launch the roof out over the existing structure. So this model started to communicate that in that we could think of the structure as a series of cassettes that each get pushed onto these girders. And in the end, well, actually, I wanted to show how tattered this model was, because it was in almost every meeting. But in the end, we actually didn't have those smaller cassettes. We had essentially half a bay being launched at once by these mammoth kind of Star Wars type structures. This Dutch company, they actually wanted to move the whole roof at once, but I think there was some challenges in getting enough trades folks out on site to actually get it all built in time to move it all at once. But I'm sure there's many other reasons too. But this started to set up a framework of the structure where we're starting to study these cassette modules. And then the first, really the first room that you experience at the airport is at the drop-off with the canopy. And the form of that roof was the inspiration to start looking at how the roof could shape itself, not just to deal with water or certain other challenges, but also to start to create that intimate scale. So starting to shape the roof to define these rooms. And so we did a lot of back and forth between the computer and models to test the beam profiles and what were these forms that we were creating. And we had a presentation check-in with the port with these models. And the two main pieces of feedback we got is there was some concern about these vaults and the amount of light that would come into the ticket lobby. And there was also a question of, could it be more of a fluid shape? So we started to iterate on that and develop this language of the domes in addition to these more vaulted open forms. And so we got a little wild there for a minute, going above and below the girder, and ultimately settled on these two kind of vocabularies of the vault and the dome to start to form those rooms. And there was this moment in the process where there was some struggle, to try to understand what that beam profile should be. And so this model did a lot of that work to kind of get the computer to fall in line with what we were trying to create. So this was just grabbing a giant piece of Plex that was in the model shop, and stealing a piece off of one of the older model iterations and just laying some strips of paper on top of it. So it became a kind of a pivot point where it felt like we were starting to test out the realities of what the design would be. And that included how this form and the diaphragm would be constructed on top. And so this sequence of photos are some of my favorites, because here we are in the model shop, and our great model shop team is pounding these tiny little brads into the diaphragm, into these mass plywood flat panels, so to test how are we going to shape these over the form. And then cut to the actual real life-size mock-up that's done in one of the Portland warehouses. And then taking that further onto the field, these giant screws that they're using to secure these mass plywood panels down to the beams in that fabrication airfield. It kind of ends up almost looking like a sand dune here in the end. But before I get to the last chapter here, I want to digress a little bit and talk about time, because on this project, we did do a ton of models. I'm really only showing you a fraction here today, and we had this great team, both the design team, our model shop team, and some of those team members were dedicated entirely to this project. And then we also brought in Superfab, and they helped collaborate on this model building, but then also they've done some great work in the airport itself too. It's another story for another time. But when you think about time, a lot of times people are saying, oh, we don't have time for a model on this project, or the client's not paying us to do a model. And what I like to encourage folks to do is just not make the models so precious, and think of them as ways to generate ideas. And there's a number of ways that I've thought of them over the years, and why they're useful and how they can be more easily created on projects that don't necessarily have this luxury of time. So these three projects I'll share here are using what I call my play blocks. It's just a stack of scraps, basically, that I took from the model shop. And there's a few pieces actually from college years mixed in here. But it just allows you to immediately start thinking in 3D. And not being too precious about it means that some of these blocks may not be just exactly the right scale, or you may not have enough of them, but you can get started on an idea. And as long as you don't fall in love too much with, the proportions of something, it can be a great way to just get ideas flowing. The other thing that models do is they create just the right amount of ambiguity. So when a render um, might be considered too austere because we haven't thought about the spaces beyond the glazing, or we haven't layered in all the furniture or even the people in a space. It can be austere for folks. I think there's a pressure sometimes to add more stuff than is needed in a project. And so using models, and this is example is a little bit, there was a little more effort into creating these modules ahead of time. But it allowed us to create 3 concepts very quickly. That was kind of a 15-minute span of what you saw just there. But it also, photographed well, and could convey an idea without all the pressures of a rendering. And so that ambiguity, these are all images that have been used in client presentations. So it's a quick, rough way to get an idea expressed without all that additional pressure. And then the kind of last point on this tangent is about anchoring the concept. So having something that the team can return to as you go down the rabbit's hole of different design studies and pressures that surround design. It's something that you can come back to that communicates clarity. So this last chapter that I'll share is going a bit deeper into how we fine-tuned the daylight in that roof expression. So starting here with the light baskets, and then the points of light at the columns, and then ending with the seam. So we started calling these light baskets, and developing these cassettes, this modularity. But then what kind of light patterns could we create with this kind of basketry? So we jumped in scale. Here's Disha, one of my great partners in crime. Inside of this, I think we went from 1/8 inch to 1 inch equals a foot. So this is just one dome that we're modeling here. And I take some pride in having about the messiest desk in the office. I think it's annoying to some people, but it is a lot of fun. But this idea of the basket, this is an example of making a quick basswood model just by soaking thin strips of basswood, taking a photo, superimposing it, flipping it, sketching over it. So starting to create this imagery to evoke how we want the light to come through these vaults in domes. And then we took this model to the U of O Light Lab. And some of the discoveries that came out of this was understanding that we needed to create more definition, both in how we shaped that light opening in the dome. This was the other thing that the vaulted forms did for us as opposed to the flat roof, is it allowed us to be a bit more judicious with the skylights. But then creating that definition, defining that light shape at the top, and then we were losing the definition of the light baskets in this kind of fluid form. So we started looking for that definition, and it's kind of crazy to think about how elusive it was for a while when the answer was so simple. But with this is one of those serendipitous moments where walked into the model shop. They were building this kind of edge definition model that had this gap, but just picking up a few scrap sticks of basswood, you can see the barcodes there. It's like, oh, all we have to do is just offset the lattice and let it slip through to form that basket edge. And it's one of those moments where I think the kind of an example of where the precision of the computer kind of limits your thinking, and that you're thinking everything has to remain on center and in a perfect position. And this was really not just offsetting that lattice, but what you can see here, it's not even centered within that offset. And so it took a while for us to actually get the computer form of this light basket to look right. We had to kind of model it by hand. And then because this 80-foot wide basket is not technically on center, the edges of these cut pieces of the lattice are not actually symmetrical. So it's just a moment of where the hand kind of knows better, at least for a while, from the computer. And then so coming to the columns, we have these vaulted forms of light, but then the column is really this kind of anchoring point. And as we started to move away from expressing the girder zone, the moment of light above those columns became really simplified, and just the points of light that you see there today. And then the last piece here is looking at that seam. which, like I said, that term doesn't really make any sense anymore. But we wanted this to be a strong threshold of light, and starting to bring it into that more fluid shape of the forms. We looked at bringing vines down within that space, so you'd have these lit vines, and then also starting to look at how the roof could actually turn down at these thresholds to further emphasize that definition of the rooms, but start to create these this kind of definition with light as well. And so I'm a little embarrassed to admit that it took me almost 10 years of living here to really appreciate how much light exists on a cloudy day. But through this whole process, that was the most powerful thing um, that I thought this airport could do. Would, to have someone come into this space, into this building, and experience just how much light there really is on a cloudy day. And this is a cloudy day when I was at the airport last week. So very fun to share just really a snapshot of this incredible process. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rena. That was incredible. Kind of insight under the hood to the whole process of this wonderful civic space that we have for the city now. But a special insight. So we'd like to kind of invite you all to either raise your hand or go ahead and put any questions in the chat, and Fiona, my colleague, can help facilitate any questions.
Rena, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I was hoping maybe you could like step back for a minute and just kind of paint a picture for us. When your team was brought in, just like what were the kind of primary goals of the airport redesign, and
Yeah,
how
so
like kind of working with the port, what was their kind of view here, and just kind of give us like the big picture of kind of how you got to this beautiful product. Like
yeah, it
what
was a
shaped that?
long road. I started on the project in late 2016, and the project had been going on for a couple years at that point, just simply defining what the project would be. So I started at concepts, but it took all that time just to really understand the scope of the project, because the initial interview was actually for a ticket lobby renovation. So that started to snowball, just like you start pulling on the thread at any airport or any structure that's kind of a conglomeration. And then that combined with the Cascadia subduction front really started to bring about this bigger approach to the project. And there were several studies just looking at where the terminal could be relocated. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that the port ultimately decided to do, was to bite down and rebuild in place. And the reason that you go to a lot of airports and you see this kind of leapfrog of terminal after terminal is that it's so hard to do that. So, a lot of credit to the port in that the willingness to take on that really challenging challenging attribute. So, and it really goes to create the probably the best passenger experience, because there's nothing more scary than, and granted, Portland's not a big you're not doing a lot of connecting flights through Portland, but not having to worry about what terminal you're in or where you should go is a big de-stressor.
Awesome. And I think maybe that kind of ties in well with the question David has, which was like, just how can you describe maybe the leadership from the port, and like how did they kind of help you manage this like messy modeling process and the kind of concept discovery, and maybe if you could just talk a little bit about the relationship
Yeah, so
with
the
Port.
port had a kind of executive committee group, and they were involved in a lot of these folks, kind of focus groups that had even more port folks involved. And then that executive steering committee would come together. I think it was bi-monthly or monthly for a while. And as the design progressed, there would be these check-ins, and we started to actually break it down by rooms. So we'd kind of go room by room in each of these monthly sessions and have the design presentation that was based on these guiding principles that were developed with the port very early on in the process. But I think there were some challenging moments in the project where the port leadership really showed their strength and leadership, and that it was just kind of a roll your sleeves up moment rather than any kind of finger pointing that you might see happen on some projects. And I think their high goals for sustainability was also did a lot to pave the way for what we were able to do.
Yeah. I'll see. Nico Echo really appreciates the beautiful work and presentation. Nico wants to know, can you talk more a little bit about the interface between physical and digital modeling? Just like assuming things went back and forth, how do you kind of shape that process and work between those two efforts?
Yeah, so we were early on when I showed some of those kind of space frame studies, we were doing studies in the computer on column placement because that was one of the biggest challenges. So there was a lot of digital work being done there. And then there was some digital work in um, kind of the geometry of the structure, but we'd go back and forth in making a model from the computer and then maybe having another idea from a physical model, either modifying a model that had already been made or just playing with some pieces and developing an idea and then going back into the computer. So it was really a back and forth, but the computer didn't play a strong role until we started getting into those vaults and domes. And then a lot of it was the physical model informing the computer. We would kind of make what we wanted with our hands and then try to define it mathematically. So, the difference from using using kind of a torus shape or a elliptical shape versus a paraboloid. So trying to find that mathematical definition so that we know it would be easy to convey in the documents how it should be fabricated. But it was more coming from the physical form that we were making with our hands as a starting point.
Awesome. All right, Emily says, I love the inspiration from Portland parks to inform the space. Were there any airports that served as inspiration for the team that you can think of? Emily also notes the emphasis on play and photos. Loves the photo of your desk. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, so Hong Kong was a big, that was kind of the airport that was beyond its time, maximized flexibility. And there was actually a benchmarking trip that some of our team and some of the port leadership team took together. That was really what was great about it is those tours were set up so that port staff could talk to their actual counterpart in those airports. And so those airports served as a benchmark, as a starting point, alleviating some concerns, identifying some others. And so I think those airports were Madrid was another one. um, they served as a good jumping off point for certain aspects, but then like for instance with Hong Kong, we knew we wanted to create something more intimate than that experience, but the systems, the clarity, those were great. So hopefully I answered the question.
Awesome. Okay. Kind of thinking about those spaces and how you break down kind of the larger program into other programs. David is talking about how through his experience, the layout is very navigable and intuitive. And just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your interface with the programming and process mapping and how that informs kind of ceiling envelope structure.
Yeah, there was a lot of iterations on the flow. And there was some kind of pressure on the port to create what I would call kind of a cattle chute of concessions. There's a lot of airports now that are trying to force people to shop by not providing enough seats at the gates. So you don't get I can't remember the term they used to call it, gate hoggers or something like that. But it's really kind of sad. And that's, where the port decided they wanted a unique experience. And part of those guiding principles was focusing on the passenger experience. And so the flow was really informed by um, the typology of kind of the H shape fundamentals of the airport, that you're going to come in and you're going to go two different directions. But there was a lot of study. At one point we had the security kind of where the seam is at. So that would have been a lot less pre-security concessions. But the port knew that there was some benefit. It's a little more unusual these days to have pre-security concessions, because the thought is, people are just getting dropped off. No one's going to want to hang around. But that's not really the case at the Portland airport. And actually, my eye doctor just this last year told me that when her and her husband were engaged many years ago, and they didn't have any money, they would go to the airport just to hang out and people watch and sit in the massage chairs. So whatever it is about Portland, people are willing to kind of hang around and enjoy life, maybe. So that informed the flow a lot. And so the sequence, the flow is really kind of a similar to what used to be there, just coming in through the drop-off center and then branching. But as with any project, you iterate a lot, so it took a while to get to that clarity.
Right, I love that. I'm kind of curious, maybe could you also talk about just there's probably a lot of considerations for different focus groups, and I'm just wondering kind of how do you do community engagement, or how do you kind of collect feedback on specific user groups, like people traveling with a bunch of little kids, or
Yeah,
accessibility needs, or yeah, just
yeah, and that
people that are looking to kill some time and enjoy a public space and just go to the airport. How do you kind of get that input from the broader public with a
yeah.
project like
So
this?
there were these personas that were developed. So before we really had started, even those crude foam models that you saw, just mapping out these different experience personas, both for passenger, but also the people that work there. And so, through a series of focus group meetings, identifying those needs and those different perspectives, did a lot. And then we'd, as the design progressed, we would chart those on the floor plan and show those moments of stress. And that informed where we would make concentrations of biophilic experiences or art experiences to attune to those moments of stress.
Fun. Let's see, Annie's got a question. So did the design process influence the deliverables at the end of the project? For
I'm sorry,
example,
can you say that one more time?
did the design process itself influence the deliverables for the project? And for
Yeah, when we
example,
would,
were there traditional drawing sets created, or was kind of the 3D modeling delivery?
oh, yeah, I
um,
guess it depends on what you mean by deliverable. We had a giant stack of drawings, because you imagine a space that's 400 feet by 1,000 feet takes a lot. It takes a lot of breakdown of the plan. So there were, traditional drawing sets, and then of course also that pressure to share the 3D model, even though the contract documents are the 2D plans. But then in terms of deliverables for client presentations, we had physical models. It was, a lot of effort went into crafting the pinup, having the leadership come to our office. We'd have a whole room set up with pinup boards, models, and then eventually started using 3D Inkscape, video walkthroughs, so the whole gamut.
and related to that, how in the world do you find a contractor that's up for this challenge?
Well, it took two.
Two contractors.
Yeah, Skanska and Hoffman. Um, and then also want to mention Timber Lab too, because they were a big
Mm.
kind of trade partner that did a lot to shepherd the wood, to kind of keep wood um, in how we hope to create it.
David wants to know, was a BIM model exchange used between
Yes,
the team and
yes, and
Skanska?
I'm failing to remember their name just now, but there was a company brought on that, for instance, all those mass plywood panels, they were able, they did that mock-up in the warehouse and saw where those sticky points are um, in getting a flat shape to fold down over a double curved surface. So that company was kind of a liaison between our model and the contractor in defining just how much that mass plywood needed to be shaved, just some uh, slight angles cut into those panels so they would fold down properly. And then also with the lattice, don't quote me on this, but I think there's something like 30,000 different cuts on those pieces of lattice that all was put into a CNC um, machine to create those different uh, notches in
Wow,
the lattice.
lots of attention to detail. Um, there is
But
an observation.
there's only 7 beam profiles. We had 55 at one point, but we got it down to 6. So that was
A
the
win.
lattice, we were able to do a CNC for that, but a 20 or 80-foot glue lamp beam
Wow,
requires a different kind of setup. So getting those beam profiles down to as few as possible was a big deal.
that's cool. Rena, there's an observation that the airport is still under construction. Can you talk a little bit about the upcoming changes that we'll
Yeah.
notice kind of once it's totally done?
Yeah. So if you remember the skylight, we call them nodes. Um, but when you'd come through security, or actually when you were in security in the past, looking above you were these skylights that ZGF actually designed back in the day. So that's the last piece to come down. And so when those areas of the projects are complete, you'll no longer exit through underneath the Oregon market like you do now. That'll actually just become concessions under there, and the concourse connector will still be that all glass band beyond. but you'll actually come through under those nodes. So the vaults on the ends of the airport will be complete, and you'll have the exit lanes there that then come into a renovated baggage claim where you'll drop down through these new circular openings in the baggage claim with some more vines, bring you down into and bring daylight down into the baggage claim area.
Awesome. Has there been any feedback from those that are regularly at the airport, like employees, how their
Yeah,
interactions
they're
with the space have gone
pretty
so far?
excited about it. And sounds like there's just been a lot of great feedback. I've had a chance to do a little bit of people watching there, which is fun. Not everyone looks up, but there are some people are just very focused on where they need to go. But there are those folks that, they
Mhm.
put their head up to the, or it's just watching how people sit and relax is nice too, even
Mhm.
if they aren't looking up.
I kind of love the contrast of just like the old airport was so much about the ground plane and the
Yeah.
carpet and and now it's so much about the ceiling and the kind of the light embraced and
Space.
totally different kind of 180 on the
Yeah, I was
orientation of
joking that well, I guess I will do it, but half joking that I'll put Instagram back on my phone just so I can see some of the pictures that people are posting. I guess some folks are putting their feet up in the air with a skylight in the background.
That's awesome. I love it.
Reinvention of the trend. Hey, Rena, I love the fact that your team is gonna actually address the baggage claim. That's like the huge bummer with the low ceiling after all of that fun upstairs. So
Yeah,
very
yeah.
cool to hear that. And I just wanted to actually interject that so fascinating to see that your team is working in modeling and that's over for you, basically a 10-year span, which is kind of super cool to hear. The urban design panel got approached by Randy Gregg the other day,
Yeah.
who is putting together this interesting initiative to have an exhibit, hopefully something that will find a home downtown that would be focused on modeling uh, in terms of architectural, urban design, you name it, in our built environment. And obviously your presentation today seems like a really important segue to be putting these conversations together. So we've agreed to be in some way of value to Randy in this initiative to put this model exhibit together. And we may ask you to kind of join in a conversation here going forward. I don't know how much he's talked to you about it or not.
Yeah. No, we've had a couple conversations, and it sounds like there's a space, or actually a couple of spaces right next door that they've defined. So yeah, we're in cahoots.
Okay,
Gonna
well, I
have
just wanted to sort of get on the
Yeah. No,
details of the excitement of your presentation today to let everybody listening today to know that there'll be more on that coming up. Glad to hear that you're being involved. That'll be like a huge piece of the puzzle in terms of cool models. And Randy has the fame of actually saving the city model
right.
that the city of Portland was apparently going to toss, that goes back to the 80s. So more on that later, but glad to hear you're being involved in that. We've got plenty of time, so I just wanted to throw that in quickly, and ask again, sort of pushing a little further into this idea of the modeling process as you just presented it today, and not just leadership at Portland, but leadership at ZGF, right? Where it might not have been written like huge, funky, messy modeling process as part of our contract. Was it something that ZGF had kind of prescience to say, this is how we do it? Or is your process as you presented it today, that it kind of grow organically and folded into the contract that ZGF sort of had in mind managing the work?
I don't know specifically how much modeling was defined in the contract. I know there was some in terms of presentation models, which if you ever get a chance to be at port headquarters, and I'm anticipating they'll eventually move it into the airport actually, and maybe use it to kind of point out where some of the wood has been tracked from. There's this huge um, model in the port headquarters that's I can't remember off. I think it's 1.5 inches equals a foot, but it's you can, you know, I don't know if you can see my hands, but basically you can kind of fit your head in there easily and look around. So those kinds of models I think were included in the contract, but then I think there was just flexibility in the way that we work. You know, we have a dedicated model shop staff, which is a little bit rare these days, but there is a commitment in the firm, you know, to support model making and have that be a part of our process. Not that it happens on every project, but it is something that's really supported and that we do kind of in a no matter what uh, kind of situation, even if it's not technically in our contract.
Rena, could you share for the audience? You mentioned something about a U of O light lab. What is that?
Yeah, so it's I'm forgetting the official name of it, but they have a heliodon, and now that they relocated to their northeast campus, I don't know if they have it set up yet or if there's plans in the works to do that, but it was through the architecture um, school, I believe, and Mark Fretz was involved with it when we were there. I know he's still doing work with the U of O, but I don't know if he's would be the one to ask. But you could start with reaching out to him and asking, or just someone at U of O. But it's a great tool.
Yeah, it sounds like a unique resource that I had no
Yeah,
idea existed. All right, we're getting some
yeah.
good links.
It was a bit of a challenge to get the model down there. How big it
Yeah.
was. I think we maxed out
Yeah.
the size that you could use.
Fun. Let's see, we got a couple more minutes if folks have
Oh
more
yes, someone
questions.
put it in the chat. Baker
Um,
Lighting Lab. I think
we
that's
can
right.
wait. Hmm.
Yeah, if anyone wants to turn their camera on too,
Yeah,
be nice to see your faces. But
I guess I have a couple other questions on the modeling piece of just like, what is there a scale that you like to model at? I don't know.
1
I
to
guess thinking
40.
about materials like 1 to 40.
I do
Okay,
have
so
a
with
quick
those.
answer for that. I learned that from Vlad, one of the design partners here, because it's a great scale in that it's small enough that most projects fit on 11 by 17, and it's big enough that you can use those teeny tiny scale people. And it's just so nice to not him and Han take all this time to figure out what scale. You may eventually do another model at a different scale, but to have the resources just quickly available and immediately start going is great.
Pretty cool. I'm also kind of one of the questions, and I'll jump back to questions, is just thinking about, you mentioned we have a library of ideas to last a lifetime. And I'm kind of curious, like, the modeling process is very space intensive, and like, how do you kind of inventory and capture those ideas so that they don't get lost and that they are, kind of kept in house or kept as a brain trust
Yeah,
in a design firm?
it's tough because it takes time and effort um, to do that, you know, curate where the models would go in the office. But we have been making efforts to do that. So on our second floor, we've got a space that houses, it's more oriented towards timber work, but we've got a lot of models there with shelves, and then, you know, kind of sprinkled throughout the office. But we're trying to develop more of a tagging system so that we can share a photograph on our intranet, so someone in our DC office could easily look at a model, searchable, all that. Um, but it does take time and effort to get those things to come together. But being able to share ideas like that
Very
is
cool.
really valuable.
Yeah. Nico asks, can you talk a little bit more about, related to this? Can you talk a little bit more about the development of the architectural language that was used, strips of wood and kind of how that came about and how it was developed further.
So I don't know if
Specific to the
are,
airport.
are you referring to the to that paper model with the strips of paper, or
I believe so.
Yeah, so a little bit of the paper piece, and then like the joint that you talked about, where you had this idea of the things
So-
overlapping as opposed to being just continuous. Um, in full disclosure, I'm teaching a class on spatial composition right now, and I love the idea of I'm going to be showing some of this work in a lecture I give in tectonics and articulation, and just would love to hear more about how you all developed that language, and yeah, just think about that.
yeah, I think looking at basketry was something that we used as a source of thinking about pattern, but then also, the way that baskets are utilitarian as well. So that lattice is part of the lateral system that stabilizes the beams. So, having each of those elements function both as structure, form, and finish became really important, and it's where architecture to me is at its best. But yeah, I think the language just came about through looking at basketry, making the models, and then the offsetting. I talked about that serendipitous moment where I was in the model shop and just said, oh, just offset the lattice, even though it won't technically be on center with the 80-foot span, that's okay. And then Jean, who's one of my great mentors here, had the thought of basically offsetting it further and anchoring it to the point. It's one of the lessons I learned from him, is that you don't always need to be I guess you don't always need to be logical. Like, there can be some of these kind of idiosyncratic moments in architecture, and I think used judiciously, they can bring about the subtlety that you can't quite put your finger on when you see something, or it's almost like not completing the form, leaving a gap. So there's this it's less of a one-liner in a way that way, but you kind of discover something as you look at it longer. So it's hard to put into words, or hard to define how you arrive at that, but I think it's just through layers.
Awesome. Well, Rena, I think we are just about on the hour. I want to thank you for taking the time to share the design process and really unpacking kind of step by step how you guys went through modeling and conversations and prototypes. And yeah, it's really, really awesome content.
Yeah, fun to share. And as I was putting it together, I was realizing there's so many other models, the urban furniture, all this, many layers that I didn't get a chance to share today, but
It's a
yeah,
master.
more out there. But thank you all
Awesome.
for coming.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Rena.
Thank you, Rena.
That was
Thank you so
amazing.
much. Wonderful
Rena.
presentation.
Great to see
Really,
you.
really quickly, I just want to make sure everyone saw that this session is registered with the APA, and I put the number in the chat. So if you want to get credit for that.
Thank you, Kathy. And I believe we are still working on a topic for November. If anyone has ideas, suggestions, wants to volunteer to come, let us know. That would be great.
Right
And
on.
we
All
will
right.
see you next month. Stay tuned. Thanks, Rena.
Thanks all.
Bye.